Hello, my friend. I am so happy to see you here. Welcome to English Gateway. Have you ever watched a football match and felt something strange? Not just excitement, something older, something deeper. Your heart speeds up. A stranger scores a goal and you feel it in your chest like it happened to you, like it was yours. My friend, you're not alone. 4 billion people on this planet feel the same thing. 4 billion. That is more than half of all humans alive today. Every Saturday, every Sunday in a stadium in Buenos Aires, in a village field in Nigeria, on a street corner in Vietnam, the same game, the same ball, the same joy. And the beginning was nothing like the game we know today. It started with a pig. Yes, a pig, and it almost got banned many times. To understand how it happened, we need to go back through thousands of years of history. We will walk from the dusty fields of ancient China through the wild and bloody streets of medieval England into a quiet pub in London where one man changed everything, and then out across the whole world to the biggest sporting event on the planet. This is the beautiful history of football. Let us begin in China 2,000 years ago. Imagine a warm afternoon during the Han Dynasty. The year is somewhere around 200 BC. The air smells of dust and leather. Young men stand in an open field. Between two bamboo poles, a small net hangs in the air, and at their feet, a leather ball. They call this game Kuju. It means kicking the ball. The rules are simple. Use your feet, no hands. Kick the ball through the net. Kuju is not just a game. It is military training. Soldiers play to stay sharp, to stay fast, to stay focused. The Chinese emperor himself watches the matches, and here's what is amazing. No hands allowed, only feet. That one rule, that tiny decision, it would travel across 2,000 years and reach you today, because the basic idea of Kuju is the same as football. One ball, 2 feet, 1 goal. Can you imagine that? A soldier in ancient China kicking a leather ball under the sun, and in that same movement, he is connected to every footballer who ever lived. Japan had a version too. They called it kemari. Kemari was different. Gentle, quiet. Players stood in a circle and kept the ball in the air. No competition, no winning or losing, just the sound of the ball, just the rhythm, just the group. Kemari was a game for the Japanese court. Noble men, careful movements, beautiful silk robes. This was football as a kind of poetry. Greece and Rome had their versions too. The Greeks played episkouros. The Romans played harpastum. Both were rough. Both involved running, pushing, and grabbing. More like rugby than football, but still a ball, still two sides. The human need to kick something round. It is very old. But these ancient games were scattered. Each country had its own version, its own rules, its own name. They never talked to each other. They never connected. The game that would change the world had not arrived yet. It was still being born. In England, in the mud, in the chaos. Let us jump to England. The year is 1314. It is winter, cold air, wet streets. A crowd of men pushes through the narrow roads of London. They are loud. They are running. They are kicking an inflated pig's bladder down the street. This is mob football. And it is nothing like the beautiful game you know today. There are no teams. There are no limits. Hundreds of people play at once, sometimes an entire village against another village. The goal is a church door, or a bridge, or the door of an inn, sometimes miles away. There are almost no rules. You can kick the ball. You can carry it. You can punch it. You can wrestle for it. The only rule is do not kill anyone. And even that rule is sometimes broken. The streets of medieval London fill with shouting men. Windows shatter. Market stalls collapse. People are knocked down. Sometimes people are seriously hurt. The mayor of London is very angry. In 1314, he issues an official ban. He calls it a great uproar in the city. He says the striking of great footballs in public fields is forbidden. But people do not stop, because mob football is not really about sport. It is about something much more human. It is about being part of something. Your village against theirs. Your street against theirs. You and your neighbor side by side pushing through the cold mud fighting together. The game gets banned again and again. King Edward II bans it. King Edward III bans it. King Richard II bans it. Even Henry IV tries. Nobody listens. The game survives every ban, every royal order, every angry letter. Because you cannot ban a pig's bladder bouncing down a muddy street and the laughter that follows it. You cannot ban belonging in mob football, for all its chaos gave ordinary people something. A moment where the butcher and the baker and the blacksmith could stand together against the next village, against the strawber, cold against the gray winter sky. This feeling, this sense of us against them, it never left the game. It is still there today. Now we move forward to the early 1800s. Something is changing in England. The country is industrializing fast. Cities are growing. Factories are filling with workers, and the great schools of England, places like Eton, Harrow, Rugby, they are producing a new kind of young man. These young men love football, but every school plays a different version. Some schools allow carrying the ball. Some do not. Some allow pushing. Some allow kicking opponents in the leg. There is no common language, no common rules. If a boy from Eton meets a boy from Harrow, they cannot play together. Their versions of football are completely different. Something has to change. And in 1863, one man decides to change it. His name is Ebenezer Cobb Morley. He is a lawyer. He is the captain of a football club called Barnes in London. And he is tired. He is tired of the confusion. He is tired of the arguments. He is tired of matches that end in fights because nobody agrees on what is allowed. So, he does something simple. He writes a letter. He writes to a newspaper called Bell's Life. He says that football needs a governing body, a set of shared rules, one common language for every player in England. That letter starts everything. In October 1863, 11 London football clubs send their men to a pub, the Freemasons Tavern, Great Queen Street, London. They sit together. They argue. Some men want to allow carrying the ball. Some men want to allow hacking, kicking your opponents in the leg. One man, a representative from Blackheath, stands up. He says that without hacking, the game will lose its courage. He says that banning hacking would bring in, and these are his actual words, a lot of Frenchmen who would beat you with a week's practice. The room votes. 13 against 4. Hacking is out. Carrying the ball is out. And just like that, football and rugby become two different sports. Ebenezer Morley goes home that night. He sits at his desk. He writes 13 laws, 13 rules, handwritten on paper. They now sit in a glass case at the National Football Museum in Manchester, and those 13 rules are the beginning of everything. The Football Association is born. The game has a name. The game has a home. The game has rules that every player can read and follow. That pub, that vote, that letter written by a quiet lawyer from Hull. One letter, 13 rules. A world changed. My friend, here is what is coming. In the next part of this story, we travel from that quiet pub in London to a stadium in Uruguay where 93,000 people are screaming and holding strangers. And before we reach the World Cup, we will stop at a field in France where two armies put down their weapons for one afternoon and picked up a ball instead. The rules spread fast. In the 1870s and 80s, British workers and traders carry football everywhere they go, to South America, to Europe, to Africa, to Asia. They bring the ball. They teach the rules. And every place the game arrives, something strange happens. People do not just learn the game, they fall in love with it. In Argentina, boys play on the streets of Buenos Aires. In Brazil, workers play near the docks. In Spain, miners play after long shifts underground. In Italy, street children play with balls made of rags. The game travels light. You do not need a court or expensive tools or the right connections. You need a ball and a wall. That is enough. Everywhere, the same moment. A ball rolls, a foot strikes, a goal is scored, and strangers become brothers. By the early 1900s, football is no longer just an English game. It is becoming a world language. But there is still something missing. A tournament, a moment where the whole world could come together and say, who is the best? That moment comes in 1904. The Fédération Internationale du Football Association is founded in Paris. We know it today as FIFA, and FIFA has a dream. One World Cup. Every 4 years, every nation, one champion. In 1930, that dream becomes real. Uruguay, July. The first FIFA World Cup. 13 teams travel by ship across the Atlantic Ocean. Long, slow journeys, weeks at sea. Some European teams refuse to come. The trip is too far, too expensive. But 13 teams arrive, and Uruguay, the small country on the eastern edge of South America, hosts the world. The final is Uruguay against Argentina. The stadium is the Estadio Centenario in Montevideo. 93,000 people pack inside. The noise is extraordinary. The heat is extraordinary. Argentine fans cross the river by ferry from Buenos Aires chanting, "Victory or death." Uruguay wins, 4-2. The crowd erupts. Grown men weep. Women throw their arms around strangers. People dance in the streets all night. Football has its world stage. A new chapter has opened. But let us go back for a moment. Back to 1914, before the World Cup, before Pelé, before any of it. World War I, the Western Front. Trenches filled with cold and mud and fear. Two armies facing each other across a strip of frozen ground. Each side ordered to kill the other. On Christmas morning, something impossible happens. German soldiers climb out of their trenches. British soldiers stare at them from across the field. Nobody shoots. Someone waves. Someone holds up a small ball. And for one afternoon, enemies play football together in the space between the trenches. I keep coming back to this moment. No orders, no plan, no officer said, "Go out and play football with the men trying to kill you." It just happened. Because two groups of young men, cold and frightened and far from home, remembered something older than the war. The oldest human question, can we play? That afternoon did not stop the war. The killing continued the next day. But for a few hours, two groups of young men remembered something. Before they were enemies, they were just people. Football did that. Not a treaty, not a general, a ball. The game grows and grows and grows. Pelé, Diego Maradona, Johan Cruyff, Ronaldo, Messi. Names that cross every language barrier. Names that every child on every continent knows. In 1966, England finally wins the World Cup on their own soil. In 1970, Brazil wins it with football so beautiful that commentators run out of words. In 1986, Maradona scores 2 goals against England in one match. The first with his hand. He calls it the hand of God. The second with his feet alone, running 60 yards past 5 defenders, the greatest goal ever scored. In 1994, the World Cup comes to the United States. In 2002, it goes to Asia for the first time, to Japan and South Korea. In 2010, South Africa hosts it, the first African World Cup. Millions of people across the continent watch, weep, and celebrate. The 2022 World Cup final is watched by 19 billion people. One single match. 1.5 billion human beings sitting together across the planet. There is no other moment in human history like it. Today, more than 250 countries and territories play football. More people play this game than any other sport on Earth. More than 5 million official matches are played every year. The ball is still round. The goal is still 8 wide. 2 teams, 90 minutes, 1 winner. The rules have grown and changed. We have video review now. We have satellite coverage. We have players who earn more in a week than most people earn in a lifetime. Yet, go to a street in Hanoi or Nairobi or Lima and you will still find children with a plastic ball and 2 shoes marking a goal on a wall. Same game, same joy. Kuju became Kemerai. Kemerai became mob football. Mob football became 13 rules in a pub in London. 13 rules became 192 FIFA member nations, became the World Cup final, became 1.2 billion people watching the same moment together. And it all started with a foot and a ball and that oldest question, can we play? There is one more layer to this story, one that history books often leave out. As Europe industrialized, churches began to empty. Workers poured into cities. The old village community was gone. The neighbors were strangers. But something else was filling the space. The stadium. Look at what a stadium actually is. A fixed sacred day each week. Thousands gather in the same colors. They sing the same songs. They bow before the same heroes. They suffer together. They celebrate together, then go home and wait to do it again next week. Émile Durkheim, the French sociologist, called this collective effervescence, the moment when separate people dissolve into something larger than themselves. He was describing religion, but he could have been describing any Saturday at the Maracana or Anfield or a dusty field in Lagos where 200 people watch on a phone screen tied to a tree. Football now has more followers than any religion on earth. 4 billion people, and like every religion, it carries both light and shadow. The shadow is real, my friend. When football becomes a tribe, it inherits the darkest gift of every tribe, us and them. In Glasgow, Celtic against Rangers is not a match. It is a centuries-old war between Catholic and Protestant, fought every season on a grass pitch. In Buenos Aires, Boca against River has drawn blood. In Istanbul, fans have died before the first whistle. Hooligans are not bad people who like football. They are true believers, and governments have always known how to use true believers. In 1934, Mussolini staged the World Cup as a theater of fascist power. Italy won. The propaganda worked perfectly. In 1978, Argentina hosted the World Cup. The stadiums were full, the streets were singing, and a few kilometers away, in buildings with no windows, the military government was torturing and disappearing its own citizens. Football is strong enough to make people forget what is happening outside the stadium. That is the power of religion, and that is the danger of religion. Even Maradona understood this. He scored with his hand in 1986. He called it the hand of God. Millions of Argentinians forgave him instantly. Not because they did not see, but because saints are not judged the same way as the rest of us. I sit with this. The love is real. The blindness is also real. Both live inside the same 90 minutes. So when you feel that pull, that strange ancient force that football gives you, that feeling of being part of something, it is worth asking quietly, just once, what am I part of, and what am I not seeing? My friend, football is not really about goals. It is not really about winning. It is about the moment, just before the match begins, when you stand next to the person beside you, a stranger a minute ago, and you both want the same thing. You both feel the same thing. And for 90 minutes, you are not separate. You are part of something. Maybe that is what we are looking for. Not just in stadiums, in our lives, a team, a shared goal, a moment when the distance between us disappears. Football has been finding that moment for 2,000 years. So, next time you hear a crowd roar, or a child kick a ball against a wall, or a whole city go quiet before a penalty kick, remember that silence, that held breath. It is 2,000 years old, and it belongs to all of us. Thank you for listening today, my friend. You are part of this story too. I want to ask you something. Leave a comment and tell me. Where were you when a football match made you feel something you did not expect? What moment stayed with you? I read every one. And next time, my friend, we follow something much smaller than a ball. Something that crossed deserts in wooden boxes, sparked revolutions in small rooms, and woke up half the world before the sun did. Its story is waiting for us.